Not showing him.
You got to start back all over again.
All over again.
I'm sorry.
I'm already 15 minutes in.
No, it had
It just did it.
Yeah, it hadn't.
Go ahead.
Now, so Reuben represents, he's the man. If you remember the four beasts, the position of them around the ark, Reuben is on the bottom. A good kind of trick to remember the positions is the eagles up top,
Right.
north, and the lion on the east, and the lion goes around like this. Lion, ox, man, eagle.
Right.
So Reuben,
Wasn't Reuben the one that tried to save his brother? Wasn't he the one that tried to?
yeah, he tried to save Joseph.
So
Yeah.
that shows firstborn and a little bit, got a little more knowledge of the rest of them.
Right.
They weren't so
Amen.
well, he won't do
Hallelujah.
it now.
Right, that's right. And,
That come from my mother.
yeah, I agree with that because I'm the firstborn.
Amen.
And I have a quote about what Brother Brandon said about firstborn.
It don't matter. We got a quote right there.
No, or about
That's
man.
funny.
No, he said in Revelation chapter 4,
That's right.
1961, he said, now Reuben was the man, he was the first one,
Yep.
the weakest one of the bunch.
Yep.
Didn't Jacob say so in Genesis 49, Reuben, thou art the first of my strength? Now think about this in context of the man's strength.
Right.
There's no strength in us. We have to
Right.
take our strength from God. Reuben, thou art the first of my strength, but like water you went up on my couch and defiled my couch and lived with his father's concubine. See, that's the immorals of the human being, you see. The animal don't have them immorals, the lion, none of these things has that, but the man does. Run with the next man's wife and so forth, just like the same thing. Everything's completed. Now this down here, this Dan was an eagle and this Reuben was the man's face. So then we get to Simeon and Levi. Simeon and Levi are brethren, instruments of cruelty are in their habitations. O my soul, come not thou into their secret, unto their assembly, mine honor. Be not thou united, for in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they digged down a wall. Now he's talking about the story in Genesis 34. That each of these prophecies has many different directions you can go. So part of this is the story of Simeon and Levi, how they slew Hamor and Shechem after they circumcised them because they one of them had a crush on Dinah, and I'm not going to read all that. And then so he prophesied that they were going to be part of his prophecy was that they were going to be divided and scattered in Israel. And this is speaking of in Joshua 19, Simeon's inheritance was actually part and pieces of Judah's inheritance. He got just part scattered around. And Levi received, because they received the priesthood, not any particular territory. Levi received 48 cities scattered throughout the other tribes. And this is, I believe this is also speaking of Israel's rejection of Christ. Ended up, they scattered around the world, and it resulted in the 10 lost tribes of Israel. Judah, thou art he whom thy brethren shall praise, thy hand shall be in the neck of thine enemies, thy father's children shall bow down before thee. Judah is the lion's whelp. Judah is the lion's whelp from the prey, my son, thou art gone up. He stooped down, he couched as a lion, and as an old lion, who shall rouse him up? Now this is, it's speaking of the qualities of Christ, and speaking of the quality of Judah as well. So this is speaking of Christ's death. He washed in Isaiah, he washed in garments and wine, his clothes in the blood of grapes, the cross, and in Isaiah 63 he said, who is this that cometh from Edom with dyed garments from Bozrah? Wherefore art thou red in thine apparel, and thy garments like him that treadeth in wine fat? And so Judah's prophecy pictures our Lord's kingship, because Judah got the scepter, so the scepter of the Messiah is going to come from Judah. And then let's see who's next. Zebulun, verse 13. Zebulun shall dwell at the haven of the sea, and he shall be for an haven of ships, and his border shall be in Zidon. Zebulun's interesting because First of all, because he's not next in the lineage of all. If you look at the genealogy, Zebulun is the 10th, and Judah is the 4th. So Jacob jumps in his blessing from the 4th child to the 10th child. So Christ was actually born part of the Judah, but Zebulun is where he lived. Because Zebulun in I think this is Moses' prophecy. I didn't write the book down. Zebulun shall dwell at the haven of the sea, and he shall be for an haven of ships, and his border shall be unto Zidon. And that's where Galilee, what part of Galilee was in Zebulun. And Moses prophesied of Zebulun, and of Zebulun he said, Rejoice, Zebulun, in thy going out, and Issachar in thy tents. They shall call the people into the mountains, so there they shall offer sacrifices of righteousness. For they shall suck of the abundance of the seas and of treasures hid in the sand. So Zebulun, Judah is his kingship. Kind of picture Zebulun as Christ is our haven, our refuge, and our haven of rest, because it was where God, when he was on earth, let's see, he would kind of, Zebulun was kind of treated as his resting place. It was where Zebulun / Galilee was where Mary and Joseph returned from Egypt, and when John had heard that, when Jesus heard that John was cast into prison, he departed into Galilee. Now let's move on to Issachar. I'm moving a little bit fast. Issachar is a strong ass couching down between two burdens. And he saw that rest was good in the land, that it was pleasant, and bowed his shoulder to bear, and became a servant unto tribute. So this is kind of presenting Issachar as a servant and Christ as a servant. And Issachar, this is interesting. Issachar I was reading on this Hebrew website that just kind of listed out some views of different rabbis and things. Issachar has traditionally been thought of as out of Issachar came all the religious teachers, and they kind of had a symbiotic relationship with Zebulun. So Zebulun was a bunch of merchants, and they would make all the money so that Issachar could study. And even today, whenever you hear the phrase Issachar and Zebulun, you kind of it means that kind of relationship where one provides the income and the other does the study. You got kind of a relationship like that. So Issachar the servant. In Numbers 26, only Judah and Dan had more men, and Dan only had 100 more. And 1 Chronicles 12:32, it even speaks of Issachar being men of understanding. It says, of the children of Issachar, which were men that had understanding of the times to know what Israel ought to do, the heads of them were 200, and all their brethren were at their commandment. So it said Issachar were men that had understanding of the times. And then Dan the judge. So Dan, presenting Dan as a judge, but also Christ as our judge. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, an adder in the path that biteth the horse's heels, so that his rider shall fall backward. I have waited for thy salvation, O Lord. Now Dan is really interesting because in Genesis, you don't have to turn there, but Genesis 46:23, and in all the places where the sons of the different tribes are listed, Dan's sons are never listed. Dan's sons in Genesis 46:23, instead of listing his sons, it just lists like their tribal name, Hushim. And in Numbers 26:42, instead of listing Dan's sons, it just lists Shulam, because Dan's earthly land was blotted out. In cases where Dan is listed with the other tribes, Dan is often far down or even last. And Dan was the last tribe to receive an inheritance by Joshua. In Numbers 10:25, and the standard of the camp of the children of Dan set forward, which was the reward of all the camps throughout their host, and over his host was Ahiezer. So Dan went last when the children of Israel were moving through Israel. And it's telling that after Jacob makes his blessing to Dan, he says, he finishes with I have waited for thy salvation, O Lord. And then Gad, a troop shall overcome him, but he shall be overcome with the last. Now this is speaking of Christ's resurrection. And Asher, his bread shall be fat, and he shall yield royal dainties. He's the bread of life. And Gad wanted the land on the east side of Jordan before, let's see. Gad, when Joshua was partitioning out the land, Gad wanted the land on the east side of Jordan before Canaan was divided among the 12 tribes. So he kind of jumped the gun and said, well, I'll take this over. I don't want to cross over Jordan. I'll just take this over this. And because of that, he had to fight the rest of the time they were in Israel, in the land. But like I said, the way to have fellowship, 1955. Look, when Israel was dividing up their lands, there I believe it was, Gad was one of them, and perhaps the half tribe. They didn't go over into the promised land. They stayed on this side, borderline. And then Naphtali. Naphtali is a hind let loose. He giveth goodly words. And Naphtali is the cities of Capernaum, Bethsaida, Chorazin. The cities where a lot of the things that Jesus did were done in Naphtali. So he prophesied about giving goodly words. And then Joseph represents Christ. Joseph is a fruitful bough. He promised fruitfulness, the double blessing, the blessing of a multitude of nations. In Ezekiel's millennial prophecy, Ezekiel 47, Joseph is allocated 2 portions, a double portion. And Joseph was a shepherd to Israel just as Jesus is. And Benjamin, now this is the one I mentioned earlier about Benjamin being a strange, this blessing, verse 27. A strange blessing for one that was the apple of his father's eye. Benjamin shall raven as a wolf. In the morning he shall devour the prey, and at night he shall divide the spoil. And this depicts Christ as a terrible warrior, our defense. And all down through history, the heroes of this tribe were marked by their fierceness and their willing to go to battle. Ehud and King Saul, Ehud and Eglon, that's one of my favorite Bible stories to tell the kids about. Ehud stuck his sword in the big fat King Eglon. And Ehud and King Saul were both of this tribe, and Saul of Tarsus was of this tribe. And so if you kind of look back down through all the different tribes, they all look forward to Christ. Reuben, his prophecy was speaking of that. He said the excellence and dignity of Christ's person. He's the firstborn. The excellency of dignity and the excellency of power. Simeon and Levi speak of the sacrifice on the cross and the disbursement of Israel. The prophesy of Judah, the Lord's kingship. Zebulun, the refuge and haven of rest. Issachar, his service. Dan, a judge. Gad, his resurrection. The Asher, he's the bread of life. And Naphtali, goodly words. The prophecy of Joseph is a millennial reign, and Benjamin is our terrible warrior in our defense. And so let's stop there.
Good job.